All right. Well, before we get started with the Midrash, let's acknowledge that we have eaten and we are satisfied. Abba, we have eaten and we're satisfied, and we thank you for the land. It's in Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen. So our Torah portion that we studied was from Vayikra, the double Torah portion, Tazria-Metzora. Also read Haftorah, Isaiah 66, and 2 sections out of the Gospels. This was the scripture that we read, the first verses of the portion, the first part of the portion, Tazria. As you see highlighted in blue there, it's the first, that's the last word on this, on the line that has the bet at the front of it for verse 2, Tazria. And an English translation. And before we get to kind of meat of some of the study notes, a couple of a vocabulary slide, a couple of passages, and these come from 3 passages within Vayikra, chapter 13, is that we see 3 different words here: tzarat, tameh, and tahor. We talked a little about in the past. We've talked about why tzarat and leprosy are not synonymous terms. Skin disease might be, but it also, there's a skin disease, if you will, but that's the case that affects clothes and houses also. Well, the word to kind of highlight here, tahor and tameh, the root word I think is tuma for unclean. It's not as if it's lo tahor is the term used. It's a completely different word. It's not clean, but it's a different word that means unclean. But we don't have a better way of expressing it in English as like pure, impure. We have contrasting words, whereas the Hebrew is a completely different word. It's not lo tahor. It's not clean. It's a new word for a different status. So let's take a look at a guessing game. The number of mitzvot in the Torah portion. Because again, this is a double portion, so we're counting both of them: 7 and 6, 12 and 7, 5 and 7, or 7 and 11. So, any votes for A, 7 and 6, like show of hands?
Well, we can definitely say that either one or the other has 7. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, A and D both have 7 for Tazria, right?
Yes, but so between the 2 parashot, that either one has 7 or the other one has 7.
Oh, I see.
7's the correct answer for one.
For one of them, I just don't know which one yet. There were a lot. I think I would lean toward D.
Okay. Well, we can rule out the first one. Can we rule out the next one? Let's see.
Ooh.
So it's either 12 or 18, or in this case, T was the correct answer. When in doubt, guess C. Doesn't work in this particular case.
C didn't have as many. There really seemed to be a lot.
So for next time, I should rearrange these as C is 19 and D is 18. Make it more plausible. So some of the mitzvah, I have some mitzvah on the next couple slides. Then it's kind of finer print, the more detail, if you will, and all of them that are listed under FFOZ's listing from Rambam. So the Torah of the purification of a woman after childbirth. A tamei person may not eat things that are set apart, and the Torah of the offering after childbirth. The Torah of human tzarat. The one who has tzarat is to render his garments, tear them, allowing his hair to grow loose and to cover his lips. And the Torah of tzarat of clothing. Cleansing from tzarat. Offering from a Metzora after cleansing. And a Metzora must shave all his hair prior to purification. As I said, his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. And the Torah of a house, and the cleansing from Nidah. And so the arrangement of them is on this slide. Again, it's hard to read since it's finer print here, but these are the 7 from Torah portion Tazria. And the next 2 slides are from Torah portion Metzora. There's 5 on this slide, and the remaining 6 on the next slide. And one of these is uses the word zav to ascribe uncleanness to the tzav. And the word zav is one who has basically had that admission, is what that is about. Zav for the male version, and zava for the feminine. So here's an overview or a summary of Torah portion Tazria from Chabad. It's derived from. Bulk of the Torah portion discusses various forms of skin disease, skin maladies, which are contracted as a result of engaging in forbidden gossip. That's their view of the reason for these. Also discussed are certain garment discolorations, which constitute clothing tzara. So, in general, whether or not that is reading a bit into the text in terms of what causes the skin diseases, we essentially see, or that's derived from, is the way that Miriam is described as engaging in slander, if you will, against her brother, which caused tzara to form on her skin, as well as on her own. But in general terms, we can look at this and see what the main purpose of these instructions are. The main purpose of being in a clean state, tahor, was to be able to bring offerings, or to be in Yah's midst. Tahor is pure or acceptable or clean, whereas tamei is not in that state. So, what does this mean for us today, and how will we be made right again, and how will we become tahor again if you're in a state of tamei? Well, we can look at this in a sense that, first of all, we're in a land that has really no concept of pure or set apart. The difference between tahor and tameh is not known and certainly not taught. And when you think about the purpose of it, if the purpose of to be in a state of tahor is to be able to bring in offerings to the temple or the tabernacle when this was written, we don't have that opportunity now anyway. And so it's going to be, in a larger sense, beyond the US here, when the temple is established, it's going to be, I think, difficult, not just for Americans here to think about how to do this, but for people living in the land that may have the ability to go into the tabernacle or the temple rather. That's going to be a learning curve as well. And it may not, right now, because there's no way to go into the temple because it doesn't exist, there's no way to really reasonably practice this, or at least see the consequences of this. We don't want to see the negative consequences of this, but it's going to be very difficult, I think, for people in the land if they're able to go into there to manage the clean and unclean ideas, or not ideas, but of the clean and unclean things that happen to them every day, and to try to avoid contact with those in order to be able to go into the temple. Can ask the question, who among us has not become tameh, whether by direct contact or by contact with someone who is tameh? Certainly that is, in the society we live in, I doubt there's anyone who has not been in a state of tameh. We can manage some of the cleansing by bathing and washing our clothes. We can understand that we've made something, if we have made something set apart common, we must approach Yah with our lips to ask forgiveness, as our text says about this. Even though Hosea was written in a time when the tabernacle or temple rather was available, the prophet Hosea wrote this, and this is, the versification is from a Western text. Hosea 14:2-5, this says, take words with you and return to Yahweh. Say to him, take away all crookedness and accept what is good, and we render the bulls of our lips. From verse 2. Continues on, Asher doesn't save us. We do not ride on horses, nor ever again do we say to the weak or work of our hands, our mighty ones, for the fatherless finds compassion in you. I shall heal their backsliding. I shall love them spontaneously, for my displeasure has turned away from them. I shall be like the dew to Israel. He shall blossom like the lily and cast out his roots like Lebanon. And what does this mean to take words with you and return to Yah? I think that the first part of confession of sin is with, it's not, let's go and do this thing to right it. It's start from the inside to return, to do teshuvah, and say to Yah that take away all our crookedness, accept what is good, and we render the bulls of our lips. I think I have a slide that talks about this, but it's the same. It could be the same word as fruit of our lips. Para can mean either one, or at least par and para. And the idea then is to start with a confession from our own self, our own mouths. And that was Hosea 2:14, 2 to 5. So on the on this text from Ezekiel, there's one passage, one verse in Ezekiel 22. I'm not sure if I have my slide ordering right to have it up next, but if you have that up, Denver, can you bring up Ezekiel 22:26 and then chapter 44, 21 to 27?
Okay, 22, 26. For Kohanim have done violence to my Torah, profaned my holy things, made no difference between the holy and the common, not distinguished between unclean and clean, hidden their eyes from my Shabbats, and profaned me among themselves.
So what can we say about that? That at this time, Ezekiel was complaining, if you will, or expressing what Yah's complaint was, would be a better way of saying that, about Israel's leadership, having done all those things wickedly. And I think that in our culture today, most of those who consider themselves to be spiritual leaders in the United States can't do any of those things either. They don't know the difference between clean and unclean. They don't know the difference between set apart and not set apart. They don't know what Sabbath means.
Don't you think that's true for the whole world, not just even for Israel?
I don't know if it's certainly true among some of the sects of Judaism. I don't know that it's true among all of them, because there are several groups that really have a desire to do right. Maybe they're not doing it right, but they have a desire to set it apart, to declare when is Shabbat and when it is not Shabbat.
But even if you have a desire to, you can still do wrong.
Yeah, this seems though I would think it's almost intentional that they don't separate it, like they're intentionally misrepresenting that time, or the inability to distinguish between clean and unclean. I don't know that. Well, as I said to start with, it's going to be difficult for leadership, I think, as well as all the people in Israel when the temple is rebuilt, to establish those as practices within Jerusalem, at least, if not the whole land. I mean, again, the purpose of this is to be able to bring offerings into the temple, and it's probably of supreme importance if you are planning to do that. But it may even today, or rather even at that time, it would have less of an impact on people who are outlanders, in the sense of not within the ability of walking distance to Jerusalem. They would only go there during the pilgrimage feasts. And that would be the time when most of Israel would be in Jerusalem. That would be only during the times when they're commanded to be there. So it really seems like it's almost geographically more important. In other words, it's less important to be in a state of tahor if you live in the Galilee and you're not going there for 2 more months, versus to maintain a state of being in tahor if you are going to be bringing an offering into the temple for Feast of Unleavened Bread or for any other.
Is there a certain thing you can do knowingly or unknowingly that Scripture says you are permanently unclean? There's no forgiveness from it.
Well, certainly, certain types of physical defects excluded them from going into the temple.
That's not really in the same. That's true, but it's not in the same, or at least for working in the temple, it's not true for the same as being in a state you can get out of. I think Jim was asking the question if it's a state of clean or unclean, maybe
Yeah.
even the,
A lot of them do this, and then some say to be clean. Is there anything where you're commanded to be careful not to do because you won't be clean from them?
well, I would say that.
Oh, can you be forgiven for going to the temple and not knowing you were unclean?
Well, there is precedent for even knowing you're not in the right state, but doing something anyway. And that was in 2 Chronicles 30, talking about Passover during Hezekiah's time. That people did Passover, literally did Passover, even if they weren't in a state of cleanness. And Hezekiah prayed that they'd be forgiven for that, and they were. So it seems that in some situations, in terms of what is more important to do the holiday or to not do it because you're in a state of cleanness or uncleanness, it seems in that particular case, it was more important for them to celebrate Passover at that time than to be in a state of ritual cleanness. From what we see from Hezekiah. Again, that was perhaps a unique event. They had not been doing it for some time. They didn't even have the scriptures. They found the scriptures and told and informed them they were supposed
They
to
were
be.
winging it and asked God for mercy and accept as the offerings the words of faith.
Also, I mean, that's kind of what we see in Hosea, to accept their offerings from the bulls of their lips. Maybe they're in a state of you can't go into the temple. So if you can't go to the temple, there is a precedent for bringing an offering in the bulls of your lips. But that's not seemed what happened in Hezekiah's time. It seemed like they ate the Passover even though they weren't in a state of cleanness.
We do that here.
We don't do the Passover here. We don't do
We
Passover.
celebrate it.
Yeah. But
So-
that's the difference is they were doing Passover. They had a Passover lamb that they were eating that they weren't in the proper state to eat.
Well, okay. I mean to mince things, but can you be doing it properly when you are not in the correct state?
No, but
No.
Israel was still forgiven when they did it and not in the correct state, according to the scriptures.
In that case,
Yes, in history they did that and were forgiven. Now, the other question might be, it's not really related to Tameh in this sense, but it is, how do you get over death, right? The death, it doesn't really give a way to get past death. You don't do the red heifer at the right time, the ashes of the red heifer.
yeah. Then doesn't even say, or maybe
I think it says you cut off.
perpetually.
You be cut. It
Yeah,
doesn't
cut
use
off.
the word perpetual, but it will say you be
Be
cut
cut
off.
off
from people.
means probably perpetual.
Right. So the same thing would have applied. You know, how did they restart Ezra's sacrificial offering service with that rule still in effect? They had been out of the land for 70 years.
Yeah. It can only be God that says, yes, you can restart it with this.
Right, but where did they get? I mean, for those who had, I mean, you're supposed to do it within this time period, but you can't if you're exiled from the land, you're not able to do it necessarily unless you, of course, unless there were some priests from Israel that took with them ashes of the red heifer from the previous time. We're not told they did or they didn't. We're not told how they did it, but we do know they did restart the offering or restart the temple service.
I mean, I suppose if you're a priest, that's one of the things you know that you need to take with you. So
Yeah.
if they were left alive, I could imagine they would have tried to smuggle some along with them, knowing that they were essential.
Yeah, but even if they had it, didn't it say in where you were reading that even the priesthood became corrupt.
Well, Ezekiel 22 is talking about a corrupt priesthood, a priesthood that has essentially not done the things that they're supposed to do. And we see in David's famous Psalm 51, create me a clean heart, is what David's prayer is. And that is a good example of how to pray to be forgiven for that separation and keeping that separation alive, if you will, by seeking to do the wrong thing, where David is saying he wants to return and do the right thing, and creating him a clean heart so he can be once again fully in his presence.
But again, it's God that has to restart it.
Right. But you have to ask for it.
Yes.
So, we talked about the Kamei Met, the dead body in purity, as well as the sin offering chatat. Before that, the Levi'im are cleansed by the ashes of the sin offering. Before that, the Kohen Gadol must be set apart like Aaron and sons were. And we see that this is going to happen in a future temple that's not yet been built, according to the services offered in Ezekiel chapter 40, verses 48. And that starting with Aaron's sons, the lack of being set apart, so to speak, lack of whatever they were, the reason was, doesn't say impurity, but they were doing something that caused them to not be given the right offering, so to speak. And so they could well be included in a string, or at least the priests of Ezekiel 22-26 are kind of descended in a way, perhaps, from Aaron's sons who did wrong. It's sort of it's a type and shadow, if not certainly not a direct descendant. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that even Aaron's own sons could violate what the scripture says. Aaron's own sons.
You had first-hand knowledge of what they were supposed to do
Yes.
and not do.
So some follow-on. Will these things, the cleanness, occur when Yeshua returns, or will building the temple and doing the offerings in a clean state bring about the return of Yeshua? There's obviously, you've heard the debate within traditional Judaism about whether that we shouldn't build the temple because that will come with Messiah, or if we start building the temple, that will cause Messiah to return. That's a teaching within traditional Judaism, not necessarily what the scriptures say about that, but I think it's fueled by the desire to have the system returns, the sacrificial system return, and the offerings to return. It's built on that hope to do that, not necessarily on a specific text that says it. One thing we do see is our scriptures in the book of Acts talk about a restoration of all things. The book of Acts in chapter 3, verses 19 to 21 reads, "Repent therefore and turn back for the blotting out of your sins, in order that times of refreshing might come from the presence of the Master, and that he sends Yeshua Messiah, pre-appointed for you, whom heaven needs to receive until the times of restoration of all matters, of which Elohim spoke through the mouths of his set apart prophets since of old. And so, looking back at some of these things from the restoration of all things, how does that fit into the bulls of your lips, for example? Because if the important thing if that's the most important thing of the bulls of your lips from we see it in chapter 14 of Hosea. If that's the most important thing, we can bring those offerings now, whether or not there's an actual temple to bring. We can do that now. Because Hosea was in a time when there was a temple, and he even talked about it, bring the bulls of the lips, in a time when there was a temple standing. So Yah desires for us to approach him in a way that is acceptable. And right now, we are in a time where we're out of the land because we did not keep his ways, and so we were exiled. So what does it mean? To do our best until that time when his ways are fully restored. We can't practice some of those practices now, today. Although it would be hard to do in today's society. For example, if we were to not, I wouldn't say pretend is not the right term here, but if we were to operate as if the temple was in our city, how would that affect where we go, what we do? It probably would have a pretty big effect. It would be difficult to know, for example, in some cases, if we've touched something that have that status of uncleanness.
I imagine riding on any form of public transportation.
Yeah.
Or walking over a grave. Such as walking out in the mountains, you don't know what's buried under where you're walking from eons ago.
Excuse me. Well, so our Torah portion started with this discussion, I'm calling the Torah of giving birth up here. Now, this translation translates he as if. It can also be when a woman conceives and gives birth. So it's not necessarily as if or if not, but as if and don't when. Same word, he. And the text continues on until it kind of ends with discussion of the burnt offering for a sin offering. And we could perhaps ask, well, why a sin offering? Sometimes answered humorously because of the rabbis talk about the cursing that a mother might do to her husband when she's in the state of giving birth.
You did this to me.
You did this to me. Yeah. So, why a difference between male and female babies, and why a sin offering?
Oh, we've wiped that out in the United States, right? Difference in male and female.
It's like,
These other countries have feminine and masculine words. No, can't do that. Can't have that.
well,
Sorry.
all words now are in
Neutral gender.
Neutral gender, yeah.
Well, no, you're not even allowed to determine the gender of a baby.
I mean, like Mexican words, Israeli words, a lot of the world's words are based on the feminine form of the word and the masculine form of the word. Can't do that. They gotta come up with a new word.
Well, they have. That's gender is Z.
The,
Z.
Z,
It's called them. So here's some traditional answers to the questions. Rabbi Hoffman suggests the 2-week period should have applied to the birth of a son also. However, the Torah removed the condemnation from the mother of a boy after only 7 days so that she could be purified before the Brit Milah celebration of her son.
makes sense, but does the Torah really give that as a reason?
Torah doesn't give a reason for it, but people are going to ask questions. She shall bring 2 offerings, elevation and a sin offering, because she seeks atonement for 2 kinds of sins. The elevation offering atones for resentful thoughts she may have had against her husband or even her creator during her labor pains. Sin offering atones for the possibility that in her agony she may have sworn never to live with her husband again. And these are traditional answers to questions that probably don't realistically have a specific answer for it. It is really if you will, trying to answer the reasoning for something that Yah says to do without a reason given.
You don't need a reason if you're just gonna do it. Just do it. You need a reason if you're thinking about not doing it.
Although the service of the sin offering is performed first, the Torah mentions the elevation offering first because it symbolizes the goal of the entire service, to achieve closest to Elohim and become dedicated to Him. The circumcision on the 8th day, this is what this is discussing. Although the commandment of circumcision has already been given in chapter 17 of Bereshit, it is repeated because of the new laws in this verse, that circumcision may be performed only in the daytime, since the Torah specifies day, and that since the Torah specifies that it must be on the 8th day, the child must be circumcised on that date, even if it falls on Sabbath, unless, of course, the infant's health requires a delay. It's derived from Talmud Bavli, Shabbat 132a. See in the Tazria-Metzora, of course, that it's discussed about Yeshua, or Yeshua talking about them, about Brit Milah on the 8th day. Yeshua says, I did one thing, and because of this, all of you are amazed. Moshe gave you Brit Milah, not that it came from Moshe, but from the patriarchs. And you do a boy's Brit Milah on Shabbat. If the boy is circumcised on Shabbat so that the Torah Moshe will not be broken, why are you angry with me because I made a man's whole body well on Shabbat? Stop judging by surface appearances and judge the right way. So Yeshua equates circumcision with healing, I believe. It seems like it's making that kind of connection here. Making the whole body well versus making, just the private parts well. We also say that within Judaism of today, the Hallel answer is to heal. But healing is allowed on Shabbat, and so the arguments were being made, I think, by those who did not fall under the Hallel school at the time. Gospel of Luke says, on the 8th day, when it was time for his Brit Milah, this is Yeshua, he was given the name Yeshua, which is what the angel had called him for his conception. When the time came for their purification, according to the Torah of Moshe, they took him up to Jerusalem to present him to Adonai, as it is written in the Torah of Adonai. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to Adonai, and also to offer a sacrifice of a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons, as required by the Torah of Adonai, for those who are in the state of being poor. So this brings us to the end. That's the end of Tazria-Metzora follows, and here's the first two verses of Metzora, where you see that word Metzora right there, Ha-Metzora, and translates to the someone afflicted with tzara, or afflicted with skin disease. In chapter 13, it talks, well, we'll look at, chapter 13 is also still talking about Tzarat, and the, which, Metzora and Tzarat are related words for us. So, which could develop into the skin disease, Tzarat, and then this kind of summarizes that section. This would be a law concerning this person afflicted with Tzarat in the day of his purification, and bringing him to the Kohen. So bringing someone to the Kohen is in many ways a testimony that when Yeshua healed someone from leprosy or tzarat, they would show themselves to the Kohen, and that would be a testimony to the priesthood that he's been healing people from Torah, which there's not really any evidence that happened prior to Yeshua's time. There was you may see some legendary teachings about that, but I don't think we've seen it. It's not really, the only time we see a scripture or healing of Tzarat is from Naaman or Naaman, who was told by the prophet to go into the river Jordan. But that shows how much of a miracle that was. And so that would definitely get the attention of priests and Levites if that were the case. Here's a commentary from Art Scroll on this. It says, for hundreds of years, the popular translation of Tzarat has been leprosy, and it was commonly accepted that prevention of the disease's spread was a reason for the quarantine of a suspected victim of Tzarat, and the exclusion of the camp of a confirmed Metzora, one with Tzarat. The person smitten with the malady, Rabbi Hirsch, Metzora, person smitten with the malady, someone with Tzarat. Rabbi Hirsch demonstrates at length and conclusively that both of these notions are completely erroneous. Very briefly, it shows that the symptoms of a Tzarat, one who's outlined in the Torah portion, are far different from those of leprosy. Furthermore, if the reason for the Metzora's confinement is to prevent contagion, that makes, some of the laws would be ludicrous, makes no sense. For example, if the malady covers the victim's entire body, he is not tameh, but if the skin begins to heal, he becomes tameh. In the case of a house that is afflicted, then the Torah prescribes that before the house is pronounced tameh, all its contents should be removed because they would become contaminated if they are left inside at the time of the pronouncement. So it's almost as if when it becomes tameh when the priest says it's tameh, even if the things within that same house is saying, if it's really to prevent contagion, you wouldn't take things out of the house before you examine it. You leave them in so they wouldn't contaminate other things. But if there were a danger of contagion, it would be irrational for the afflicted household items to be excluded from the quarantine. In perhaps the most telling example, the Talmud teaches that if symptoms of Tzarat appear on a newlywed or during a festival season, the Kohen does not examine the affliction or declare it to be tameh in order to not interfere with the celebration. But if the purpose of these laws is to prevent the spread of disease, it would absolutely be imperative to enforce the laws at times of great overcrowding and mingling, as in time of wedding. Again, that the pronouncement from the Talmud is not Torah, but the example from the Torah still holds true. In other words, why wouldn't, if it's about spreading contagion, it would be not prudent to remove contagious items out of someplace before examining it.
But what if it was to avoid the spreading of contagion and for whatever reason the Kohanim did not understand this, and so they were being liberal or lax in their application of it to give people kind of a workaround for it to allow for things that really shouldn't have been allowed for.
Well, that would say, well, the Torah isn't given from Yah. That would be that answer. That argument would be that this from Leviticus or Vayikra is a interpretation of people, not something that has been given from on high.
Well, I'm saying in reference to the practice of allowing a festival to go on or whatever. Clearing out the house, to me, that makes sense. It would not make sense if you took that stuff and moved it into another house. So that would be a way of spreading contagion. But clearing out the house to see what's going on with the house makes sense.
How? I don't see it making sense.
Because if you want to see whether or not there's let's call it a mildew or whatever growing in the house, then you need to have the furnishings and things out there that would conceal it revealed so that all the walls and floor and everything are revealed in there so that a clear examination can be made.
But it seems to me, though, that would be potentially spreading contagion if it's because clothing can also become inflicted with tzaraat. So if you remove tzaraat infected clothing out of the house somewhere else, that's keeping that stuff, if you will, contagious.
Could it be, Wayne, that when it says moving it out of the house, that it doesn't say that, but it actually means to destroy, to burn it, to take it out and burn it somewhere maybe?
No, because it specifically says so that it will not become condemned with the house. If the house is declared contagious, you couldn't anything in there is going to have the same status of the house. It's giving them the opportunity to remove things so that it would not become under the ban, so to
It
speak.
looks like they would then have to examine the furniture.
Well, those
Right.
things would still be subject to examination by somebody, not the priest, but somebody's going to notice if there's something growing on them. And that's what I'm saying, to take them and move them into another house would not make sense. But to take them out into the sunlight would make sense.
But again, it doesn't really talk about.
It doesn't. I agree.
That's why it sounds like there might be a piece of the puzzle missing there or something.
Well, again, it all falls under the hook idea, I think. The idea that it's a command to do because Yah says to do, not necessarily because it follows human reasoning. But
Then does it say you can move the furniture back in?
once the house is declared clean, you
It
can.
says that.
I think I want to say yes, because will there be no prohibition against it? Because if the house is clean, it has no status of being unclean. So you can bring the things that
Yeah,
were.
I think his point is whether or not this stuff still exists to move back in.
Well, why
Because
would
how
it
long does
exist?
it take for the house to be purified?
Well, to be checked, I think it's 7 days, if I remember right.
So all the furniture's gonna be sitting outside because you're not gonna move it into another house yet for 7 days.
But that's the thing, it didn't specifically prohibit moving it into another house.
Or tent.
That's true. That's a question. There's a lot of questions, there's some missing parts there. How do you actually walk it out till it's complete? You do A, B, C, D. Where's D? I don't know. Well, I'll skip that.
Well, I mean, there are inspection points given in the text that the priest is to inspect the.
For furniture and for houses, it's different steps than inspecting a human.
Right, but the houses are covered. Doesn't, I
And the
don't,
furniture. 'Furniture and the clothes and everything are covered.
But then does it say you can move the furniture back in?
and the furniture and the clothes and everything are covered. And the furniture and the clothes and everything are covered. And the furniture and the clothes and everything are covered.
yeah, it talks about whether, at some point you can cut things out, and then if it comes back, you basically destroy it, like for clothing, for example.
Or the whole house.
Or the whole house has to be taken down, yeah.
Which when I was saying, wow, that's a lot of trouble to go through, tearing stones out of your house, bringing in new stones, replastering the thing, and it still might be condemned.
Deep in the ground, maybe. Don't know. But what I think the reason that the sages came up with is on the slide. He's talking about the reason for this is not something that is a physical manifestation of something spreading, but basically the physical manifestation of a spiritual disease. It says a punishment designed to show the malefactor he must mend his ways. The primary cause of tzara'at is the sin of slander. As the sages say, the word Metzora is a contraction of motzia ra, one who spreads slander. Don't know if that's necessarily grammatically correct, but that's what the sages say. The sages teach that the affliction is a punishment for the sins of bloodshed, false oaths, sexual immorality, pride, robbery, and selfishness. Continuing on with the Art Scroll commentary, it says that the patterns that emerge is that of a divine retribution for the offender's failure to feel the needs and share the hurt of others. God rebukes this antisocial behavior by isolating him from society, so that he can experience the pain he has imposed on others and heal himself through repentance. Again, that's a commentary, if you will, from the rabbis on this. Not necessarily what the scriptures say about it, but I think it's definitely good to avoid slanderous behavior, slanderous speech.
Like the sages sometimes do.
Sages sometimes avoid slanderous speech.
Sometimes they engage in it.
When a man, this is from Matthew chapter 8, when a man afflicted with tzara'at came, kneeled down in front of him and said, "Sir, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Yeshua reached out his hand, touched him, and said, "I am willing, be cleansed." And at once he was cleansed from his tzara'at. Then Yeshua said to him, "See that you tell no one, but as a testimony to the people, go and let the Kohen examine you, and offer the sacrifice that Moshe commanded." So again, this would be a testimony to the people to do that. Of course, tell no one but the priest, but I think as we see from continuing reading, that's not exactly what happened. Chapter 11, this is, I think, from Yochanan HaMatbil asking, or his disciples asking, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for someone else?" Yeshua answered, "Go and tell Yochanan that what you're hearing and seeing. The blind are seeing again, the lame are walking, people with tzara'at are being cleansed, the deaf are hearing, the dead are being raised, the good news being told to the poor, and how blessed is anyone not offended by me." This is the next slide that we've talked a little bit about before, but there is a teaching in Judaism about the Messiah and lepers. And this is from Sanhedrin 98b. The Messiah, what is his name? The rabbis say, the leper scholar, as it is said, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him a leper, smitten of Elohim and afflicted." And I think that is a very telling statement, but it is something that's true within Judaism today, that Yeshua is someone you keep away from, right? You esteem him a leper, meaning you're not going to go anywhere near Yeshua because you want to stay away from him like a leper. And that's,
They don't deny his existence, but they don't dare to get close to him.
So these instructions concerning family purity, do they still apply today? In the exile, are these instructions difficult to follow? Those who are married, did you receive any premarital counseling concerning these instructions? Those are sort of overview questions to keep in the back of your mind. Not necessarily going to really address. I think some of these are. It's easy to say, probably for most people. The instructions apply. How do they apply? How do we walk those out? Are they difficult to follow? The middle question, yes. I think today in this society, yes. And for most people, the answer for the last one is no. Regarding premarital counseling regarding Torah instructions. One thing I found interesting was that the house is cured. You recognize the word Rapha there as the root word of Nirpa is the word there. It's Rapha is the root word. Nirpa is a word used there, and it's you see it in scripture talking about Yah as one who heals as Rophe, the one who heals. This says that the house as an infection it's cured or it's healed. The word Rapha is used there. So the next section is when a man has a discharge. We see in paragraph 15, tell the people of Israel when a man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanness. Here's a kind of a comparison from the Septuagint text. It says, "Speak now to the children of Israel, thou shalt say to them, whenever man shall have an issue out of his body, his issue is unclean." And this is the law of the uncleanness, whether he has a gonorrhea out of his body or his uncleanness is in him by reason of the issue in which his body is affected through the issue, all the days of the issue of his body by which his body is affected through the issue, there is his uncleanness. This is an English translation. I didn't check the Greek to see how this wording is, but you can see it's a bit longer than the Hebrew text. Right? Also have a translation comparison on verse 11. If one has a discharge, without having rinsed his hands in water, touches another person, the person shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, remain unclean till evening. Where the difference is, this is touches without rinsing his hands in water, shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean till evening. So it's not. I think there's other translations that the idea of rinsing his hands in water. So there's another translation I think gets it better than these that talk about in moving water or running water. The idea is it's not just in some sort of bowl, but it's in something like the Jordan River. I think that's what I remember from that. I probably should have picked a different translation that actually brings it out a little bit better. Now, what does it mean to touch another person? Well, it seems to mean, if you look at the word naga, which is the word used here about touching, you can see that the phrase there in a couple different places. Psalm 88, a couple of translations of that. For my soul, my nefesh has had enough troubles, and my life has drawn near. The root word there is naga, to Sheol, or as Green's literal says, to touch Sheol. The sons of Korah here in this psalm recognize that Elohim brought about their condition, and they pray for him to change it. change the position. Continuing on with Nagad, look at a text, the basically abbreviated lexicon definition: to touch, to reach, to strike, to produce an effect. And so that's why the theological word book of the Old Testament talks about to touch something is to extend one's authority over it. I think when you look at that and what touching in that context implies is bringing somebody's authority over it. In other words, you take control of something is to reach out to naga something. When you get down to the discharge requiring a sin offering and a burnt offering, it is something that is causes you to, when you require this sort of event, to touch it, to reach out, to take control over it. It's a little bit different than a person with the discharge, but it's someone who is touching or taking control over a piece of clothing or an individual couch or chair on account of his discharge. The atonement is on account of his discharge. So we look at that as the sin offering here. You may ask why, but it's the word chatat, means sin offering. It's typically for unintentional sin, sometimes a result of carelessness, but it's also used in something that is more than unintentional sin. It's the word used perhaps for general sin, but it's the word used for the golden calf sin as well, which says, I looked and there you had sinned, chatatem, that's the root word is chata, against Adonai. In verse 20, and that's in 9:16 and 9:21, I took your hatachechem, your plural, you all's sin from the calf you made, and burned it up. So the sin of the golden calf doesn't seem to me to be an unintentional sin. It's purposely made, but it's called in that same category as the other, as unintentional sin. So that's why many view sin offering as an overarching term, not only for unintentional sin. When you see this it's termed the same thing in Shemot 32. It says, "Whoever has sinned against me, shall I blot out his face." And this is discussing the golden calf example, as well as just simple carelessness or doing an inadvertent sin. Any woman has a discharge is next. Talking about how many days she is to wait. She has to wait in her separation for 7 days, according to this touches her unclean till evening. According to the Torah, what must a woman do to become clean again? That's the question. Here's kind of a longer answer according to what the rabbis say. I'll bring out a more drilled in version. You can't read that, too small print, but drilled in, what the rabbis say is that the Pentateuchal Code, that was from, I think, Jewish Encyclopedia, ordains that a menstruous woman shall be unclean for 7 days from the beginning of the period, whether it lasts only 1 day or all 7. In either case, she is unclean for 7 days only, but during this time, her defilement is communicated to every object in which she touches in contact. These laws, however, have been extended in many ways and made more onerous by the rabbis, and by interpretations and by customs which have been adopted by Jewish women themselves. According to these more rigid requirements, the woman must reckon 7 days after the termination of her menstrual period. If in this last 7 days, she cannot become pure until the 15th day. Purification, therefore, can be gained only by a ritual mikveh, and until the woman has taken this, she remains unclean according to the interpretation of Rabbi Akiva, which is accepted by rabbis generally. Another view is the rabbinic opinion is 5-day minimum plus 7 clean days, a total of 12 days. Counts nidah first 5 and then 7 days after that. And then, of course, the mikveh being required. Now, there's also this passage from chapter 15, verse 25, that says, a discharge of blood for many days other than or beyond the time of her monthly separation, beyond her usual separation. And what happens there is that it does require, well, this is the following verse, she sits on unclean as the clean of her nidah. And the next couple of verses, and the highlighted verse is, but if she is cleansed of her discharge, then she'll count for herself 7 days, and after that she's clean. And then she brings the offering on the 8th day, 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. So I read some opinions by Christians saying that this applies to every time a woman does nidah, she has to bring an offering to the temple, but that's not the case here. This would apply to the woman who was cleansed by Yeshua. There would be basically required to wait to the 8th day to be clean, and then after that to bring the 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. And as it said, it kind of fits after the priest makes atonement. So, commentary: if the rabbinic decree of simple 7 was followed, every woman in Israel would have to bring a sin offering every month, because that's what this is talking about. After her period of nidah. So that's my commentary, is that the 7+7 is essentially putting a fence around the Torah, but not bringing up the offering requirement, which would be beyond what was actually spoken of. So what if the usual nidah is more than 7 days? What if a woman's period is more than 7 days? Well, that sort of would mess things up in a sense, because it's beyond the usual time of month separation. So if the normal nidah is greater than 7 days, it doesn't apply in the sense of beyond the normal time period. So the scripture doesn't necessarily directly account for the normal, if the normal is greater than 7 days. It says if the nidah is for 7 days, and if your husband comes to you for sexual activities, he is unclean for 7 days. So the weight of your command here is to not cause your husband to be unclean, so don't allow that to happen. And so this means that to wait until you are blood-free, but doesn't necessarily dictate the 7+7 as decreed by the rabbis. We'll talk a little bit about the red heifer ashes. A clean man shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and shall place them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for water for nidah, is for cleansing from sin. So does this mean that the normal monthly nidah requires mikveh according to the Torah? I think the answer is no. It's just for the case of when the cleansing is needed. You don't necessarily have to go to the temple to get the ashes. You can do it wherever they place ashes around the country, according to what we read about in the Mishnah, where they were placed. So the gospel of the month. Oops, sorry. Here, we see here is, can you see the gospel in nidah in that there is a cycle, if you will, of clean, unclean, clean again. And so when we continue looking at Vayikra, we can conclude that the life is in the blood. Therefore, when blood is inside, it is life. When it's outside body, it only means death. And so there can be a cyclic action here of clean, midah, clean again. That is the monthly cycle. There's also a cycle you look at in terms of creation, redemption, restoration. And there's a cycle of beyond the usual time of nidah as a part of the separation. Beyond that, the restoration again, and that's I think a larger sense of creation, restoration, and creation, separation, and restored again beyond the usual time. So it kind of it kind of keyed on that phrase to a restoration of all things that we saw in the book of Acts. So, question: how do you avoid monthly nidah? Well, if a woman has a monthly flow, it's because she's not pregnant. If she is pregnant, she doesn't have a monthly flow. So if you follow the be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, we would avoid the usual normal nidah. To obey is better than blood sacrifice. That might not be considered proper to say this. Might just push back from the ladies. So, why all the instructions? Why all of these instructions? Well, if you go back to the idea that to touch something is to extend one's authority over it, let's ask this question. This shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness when they defile my dwelling place, which is in the midst. Is it the word midah that is there to separate? No. It's not that. It's not that word. Israel is not in a state of uncleanness in that sense. The word there used is a root word of nazir. You recognize being a nazir to be separated. They shall nazar the children of Israel from their uncleanness, lest they die in their uncleanness. So it's really to a good kind of separation. It's always the title, the subject, or the title of the slide is, as always, is for our own good, and that is what's going on here. Is to not extend our hand over something that we shouldn't be extend our hand over to proclaim it, to claim it, so to speak, but it's to separate us so that we're not killed in the process. And that is my last slide. This is a picture that Cece took the other day, the clouds. Nice clouds here, caused, I guess, some tornado damage in central Oklahoma. What else would you like to discuss? If nothing, we'll pray and close. We do thank you for allowing us to discuss your Torah, to ruminate on it. Father, we ask you to give us wisdom to understand exactly what you'd have us do, and how we can best walk it out here in the exile. We ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen.
A good picture.